Okay, so today we're going to dive into something that's been generating a lot of buzz
Oh,
lately.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's particularly in the men's health and wellness space.
I can see why that might be a hot topic. Lots of interest there.
For sure. We're talking about Fadogia agrestis.
Fadogia agrestis.
It's a shrub, actually.
Huh, didn't know that.
Yeah, native to Nigeria. And, as with anything that gets popular, there are some pretty bold claims floating around about its potential benefits.
Yeah, that tends to happen, doesn't it?
It definitely does. So in this deep dive, we're going to cut through the noise and really get into what the actual evidence says about Fadogia agrestis and these supposed benefits.
Sounds good to me. Evidence over hype, always.
Exactly. And to do that, we've pulled information from a bunch of sources like health and wellness sites, articles, you name it.
Did you find any good research papers?
A few, but we'll get to those in a bit. We even watched a YouTube video.
Oh, a YouTube video. Those can be a mixed bag.
Totally. But this one was interesting. It featured a urologist talking about it.
Ah, okay, a medical professional's take.
Yeah.
That adds a layer of, how do I put it, credibility.
Right. So yeah, let's get into this. Starting with, well, where this plant comes from and how it's been used traditionally.
Yeah, the origins are always a good place to start, I think. Sets the stage.
Totally. So Fadogia agrestis, not exactly a household name, but it's been around for a while, especially in traditional Nigerian medicine.
Interesting. So what have people been using it for historically?
Well, from what we gathered, a bunch of things actually. It seems like it was used to manage fevers, and then, well, this is where it gets interesting for a lot of people, I guess.
Go on.
It was also used as an aphrodisiac.
Ah, there it is.
Yeah, and it was even used to address erectile dysfunction.
Huh. So right off the bat, we can see why it's making a comeback, especially in the men's health world.
Exactly. It's like history repeating itself, sort of. And, it's not just limited to Nigeria. It also pops up in traditional medicine in Ghana and Sudan.
Oh, wow. So it's pretty widespread then.
Yeah, pretty much. And it goes by other names, too, like just F. agrestis or simply Fadogia or even black aphrodisiac or bacon gagai.
Black aphrodisiac, that's pretty straightforward.
No kidding. So yeah, long history of traditional use, and that's often what sparks a lot of interest in modern applications.
It makes sense. People figure, hey, if it's been used for centuries, there might be something to it, right?
Right. And when it comes to Fadogia agrestis, the modern interest seems to be, well, very focused on its potential effects on testosterone.
Testosterone, huh? That's a big one.
It is. There's this whole idea out there that it can boost testosterone levels.
I could definitely see the appeal there. Higher testosterone is often linked to, increased muscle mass, energy levels.
Yeah, and let's not forget libido and sexual performance. It's a topic that a lot of people are interested in, let's just say.
Absolutely. So what does the science say? Does this plant actually have the power to pump up your testosterone?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to get to the bottom of it, we have to look at the research that's been done.
Right, the good old scientific method.
Exactly. And that's where we hit kind of a roadblock. The primary research on Fadogia agrestis, it's mostly from animal studies.
Animal studies. Okay, so not humans yet.
Not yet.
Uh,
And to be more specific, we're talking primarily about rats.
Rats, huh? Well, they're often used in initial research.
Yeah, they are. And there was this one study on rats that stood out.
Okay, what did they do in this study?
So researchers gave male rats an aqueous extract of Fadogia agrestis.
An extract.
Yeah, basically a concentrated form of the plant, like a liquid.
Got it. So they gave this to the rats, and then what happened?
Well, after just 5 days, they saw some pretty big increases in the rats' testosterone levels.
5 days. That's pretty fast. How big are we talking here?
It's actually pretty wild. They used different dosages, right? So some rats got 18 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, some got 50, and others got 100.
Okay, so different groups, different amounts. Makes sense.
Right. And the increases in testosterone, well, those varied too, based on the dose.
So the higher the dose, the bigger the jump in testosterone.
Exactly. It ranged from a 2-fold increase all the way up to a 6-fold increase compared to the control group, which didn't get the extract.
Wow, a 6-fold increase. That's huge.
It's a lot. And it wasn't just testosterone. They also observed increased libido in these rats.
Oh, so it actually seemed to affect their behavior too.
Yeah, it seemed to. And then there was another study where they looked at testicular weight.
Testicular weight.
Yep. And guess what? They found an increase there too, between 11 and 15%.
So everything's pointing towards, increased male reproductive function.
It does seem that way. And there's one more thing, kind of a unique finding.
What's that?
In these rat studies, they also observed an increase in ejaculation latency.
Ejaculation latency, meaning
Basically, it took the rats longer to, ejaculate.
interesting. So potentially longer lasting
Hmm.
performance, if you will.
Yeah, that's the idea, I guess. And this is a big but, we keep saying rat studies, and that's super important to remember.
Right, because rats aren't people.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Despite all these, intriguing findings in animals, there are zero, literally zero, published studies in humans looking at how Fadogia agrestis affects testosterone levels.
Not at all.
Nope. And that's a huge gap. It means we can't just assume that what happens in rats will happen in people.
Yeah, that's a dangerous assumption. We're different species, after all.
Totally. So, you might see claims out there about Fadogia agrestis boosting testosterone in humans, but those claims are based on, well, basically guesswork.
Extrapolation from animal data. It's like saying, well, this drug made the mice lose weight, so it'll probably work the same way in humans.
Exactly. And sometimes it does, but often it doesn't. Human biology is way more complex.
For sure. So even though these animal studies are interesting, they're not proof that Fadogia agrestis will have the same effects in humans.
Exactly. It's a starting point, but we need human studies to know for sure.
Absolutely. And that brings up another important point, safety.
Right. Because we don't have good human studies, we also don't have a clear picture of how safe this stuff is for people to take.
Yeah, that's a concern. Natural doesn't always equal safe.
Not at all. And in fact, one of the animal studies we looked at, it actually raised some red flags about potential toxicity.
Oh, toxicity. What kind of toxicity?
So in this study, the rats were given Fadogia agrestis for 28 days, a bit longer than the other studies.
Okay, yeah.
Well, after those 28 days, the researchers started to see signs of potential damage to the liver, kidneys, and even the testicles.
That's not good.
Not good at all. And they linked this damage to the Fadogia agrestis, suggesting that it might have been toxic at that dosage and duration.
Again, it's a rat study, but it's definitely something to be cautious about.
Absolutely. Especially since we don't know how it might affect human organs.
And what about specific groups like pregnant women or breastfeeding mothers? Is there any information about that?
Not really, and that's another reason to extra careful. Because we lack that human safety data, the general recommendation is for pregnant and breastfeeding women to avoid Fadogia agrestis altogether.
Makes sense. Better safe than sorry, especially when you're talking about a developing baby or a newborn.
For sure. And on top of all that, we don't have any good data on how Fadogia agrestis might interact with medication.
Oh, yeah, drug interactions. That's crucial.
It is. And we also don't know what a safe and effective dose would be for humans.
So lots of unknowns, both in terms of potential benefits and potential risks.
Lots of unknowns. Now, even with all that uncertainty, I'm sure some people are still curious about how this plant might actually work in the body.
Yeah, if it does have these effects, what's the mechanism behind it?
Well, the truth is, we don't fully understand that either. The exact way Fadogia agrestis might work is still a bit of a mystery.
Okay, so no clear answers yet.
Not yet. It seems like it might have something to do with certain bioactive compounds in the plant.
Bioactive compounds, you mean like specific chemicals that have an effect on the body?
Right. We're talking about things like monoterpene, glycosides, alkaloids, and saponins.
Those are some pretty complicated words.
They are. Basically, they're naturally occurring compounds that are found in various plants.
Okay, so how do they tie into Fadogia agrestis?
Well, researchers think these compounds, or at least some of them, could be responsible for the effects we see in those animal studies.
So these compounds might be the key to its potential testosterone boosting properties or whatever else it might be doing.
That's the idea. But again, it's all still very speculative. We need more research to really nail down how it all works.
More research, that's the recurring theme here.
It is. But, it's not just about testosterone and, men's health. Our sources also mention some other traditional uses and potential properties.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, apart from its traditional use as an aphrodisiac and for fevers, there have been some very preliminary studies, mostly done in test tubes, that suggest it might have other effects.
Test tubes. So not in living animals or people.
Right. This is what's called in vitro research. Basically, they isolate components of the plant and see how they behave in a controlled environment.
Okay, so what did these test tube studies find?
One study looked at some glycosides from the roots of Fadogia agrestis, and they found that some of these glycosides were able to inhibit certain parasites and bacteria.
Interesting. So potential antimicrobial activity.
Yeah, and they even found some mild anti-malarial activity.
Antimalarial, that's pretty significant if it holds up.
It could be, but again, very early stages. Another test tube study suggested it might have antispasmodic properties.
Antispasmodic, what does that mean?
Basically, it means it could potentially help to relax muscles.
Huh. There's lots of potential avenues to explore, but still a lot of research needed.
A lot of research needed. So, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the traditional uses, the animal studies, the lack of human research, the potential safety concerns, the possible mechanisms.
Yeah, it's a pretty complex picture.
It is. So, with all that in mind, what would you say is the most important message for our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
I think the most important message is this. While Fadogia agrestis might have some interesting effects, and the animal studies hint at potential benefits, especially when it comes to testosterone, we just don't have enough information yet to recommend it for human use.
Right. The lack of human research and the potential safety concerns are big red flags.
Absolutely. And that leads to another really important point, which is talk to your doctor.
Always good advice.
It really is.
Yeah.
Before you even think about trying Fadogia agrestis, or any supplement for that matter, talk to your healthcare provider.
They can help you assess the risks and benefits, taking into account your individual health situation.
Exactly. They might even be able to suggest alternative approaches that are backed by stronger evidence.
And if you're concerned about low testosterone, don't self-diagnose. Talk to your doctor. They can check your levels and recommend the best course of action.
It's so important to remember that natural doesn't always mean safe or effective. And when it comes to something as complex as hormones, you really want to be working with a qualified professional.
Couldn't agree more. So, bottom line, Fadogia agrestis is a fascinating plant with a long history of use. But in terms of its potential benefits for humans, we're still very much in the dark.
More research is needed, both to confirm its effectiveness and to ensure its safety. Until then, caution is key.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And this whole deep dive, it actually raises a bigger question, doesn't it?
What's that?
Well, it makes you think about how we approach natural supplements in general. There's so much information out there, so many claims.
And it can be hard to separate fact from fiction.
Exactly. So to our listeners, I would say this. Fadogia agrestis is just one example. The bigger lesson here is to be critical, to do your research, and to prioritize reliable scientific evidence when making decisions about your health.
That's a message we can all benefit from.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Fadogia agrestis. We hope you found it informative and maybe even a little thought-provoking.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
And to all our listeners, stay curious, stay informed, and stay healthy.